Hello, fellow Turkish Berthier Orman carbine enthusiasts. A couple of years ago, I dug into some Turkish sources and I found out some bits and pieces of information which some may find interesting. I'll list my sources at the end of the video. If anyone thinks that this information sounds familiar to them, it might be because I posted them on an online forum a couple of years back. Now I'm just turning this into a video form. I believe everyone agrees that Mr. Ian McCallum gave a second life to this long forgotten carbine. Interestingly enough, the carbine is still long forgotten in its native land of Turkey. Firstly, I'll need to tell you a little bit about the history of forestry in the Ottoman Empire/Turkey, as this is directly linked to why all of a sudden thousands of forestry carbines were needed in 1948. For centuries, namely from 1300s to 1923, the Ottoman Sultan and his institutions laid claim to certain forests in the empire. These forests then became the source of things like lumber for shipbuilding, construction material, firewood, industrial and military supply of wood, etc., etc. Most of these claimed forests were close to the shipbuilding and other related industrial centers. As for the rest of the forests, there were no rules, regulations, or governance. They were there for anyone's and everyone's use anytime. People could log them, hunt them, even burn them down to the ground to turn them into agricultural land. This was causing rapid deforestation in the country, and the concept of reforestation didn't exist. In 1800s, forestry in the modern sense was kick-started in the Ottoman Empire. New forestry institutions got established and many new laws and regulations were implemented based on Western European forestry experiences. However, these new forestry measures could only be implemented in limited parts of the country in limited scales. Rest of the country's forests continued to be used and abused like before, and deforestation was still rampant. When the new Turkish Republic was established in 1923, the founding fathers knew they needed to make revolutionary changes in how the forests are governed, or there wouldn't be any left. Slow, calculated steps had to be taken in establishing related government institutions such as forestry schools, universities, infrastructure, personnel, and equipment. And in 1937, the government felt that they were finally ready to pass the new revolutionary forestry law, and they knew such a new way of doing things, which would require the public to change their hundreds of years of habits, wouldn't be without controversy, and also would require a strong law enforcement. So they established a forestry force under the military. It was a whole separate military command established to enforce the 1937 forestry law. Over the next few years, the government realized that the forestry force was good in law enforcement, but their poor knowledge of forestry was causing problems. After all, it was a military corps made out of conscripts, and by the time they learned a thing or two about forestry, their time in the military was up, and it was back to square one with the new recruits. So in 1945, the government decided to abolish the forestry force and give larger law enforcement powers to the forest guards. This meant more forest guards would be needed and would be equipped with guns. I found a government decree from August 1945 signed by President İnönü ordering the forest guards to be issued with combination shotguns, with 2 shotgun and 1 Mauser barrel. I don't know if this was the initial solution before the Berthier carbines were issued. That still needs to be investigated. Then finally in September 1948, President İnönü issued a new decree ordering the forest guards to be issued with Orman-marked 3-shot rifles modified as carbines. I was able to find a copy of this decree, and here it is. As for why the Berthiers were chosen for this job, I don't know it for a fact, at least not yet, but I have a guess. First of all, the narrative of it used a hard-to-find ammo, so if the bad guys got a hold of them, they wouldn't be able to get the ammo for it. Narrative doesn't make much sense to me. As you've already seen in the several photos I posted, the government wasn't shy to issue various types of Mausers to the forestry guards in the 1920s and 30s, and they didn't seem to be really concerned about them falling into the wrong hands. So my guess is the following. They've concluded that the forestry guards needed military-style carbines, but the government didn't want to take thousands of Mauser carbines away from the military to hand them over to the forestry services. And please keep in mind, this is after the World War II, where Germany is no longer a threat, but the Soviet Russia is. So most likely, somebody suggested that they have all these Berthiers in the warehouses and they can be easily carbonized. Turkish military is no stranger to the Berthier rifles. They fought against them during the First World War and the Turkish War of Liberation, and they were used by the Greek and French troops during that time. Turks captured thousands of them and even purchased them from the French after the Turco-French hostilities ceased in 1921. During these times, they must have carbonized some of them for various needs. We know from the marks on the Turkish Orman Berthiers that many of them have been reworked at the French arsenals in the 1930s. So where did they come from? I believe I found the answer at the many French Vichy warships that took refuge at the Turkish ports while running away from the British fleet in the Mediterranean. I checked with a reputable military historian about this matter, and he said even though he doesn't know what type and in what quantities, he knew that many guns and ammo which were on these ships were donated to the Turkish government by the French government right after the war. Please keep in mind that there's also a narrative on how thousands of French troops crossed into Turkey from Syria and laid down their arms. I haven't had a chance to look into that. However, long and short of the story, there seems to have been enough interactions between Turkey and Vichy France during the Second World War where these rifles may have come from. The use of the Orman forestry carbine by the Forest Guards was ended in 1956 by another presidential decree. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to find any photos of the carbine in the period photos, even though thousands of them must exist in family albums of Forest Guards who carried them. Are those Orman carbines on the back of those Horst Guards?